today is about choices. Choices deliberately made by us as Christians, choices made by some misguided Pharisees, and choices made by Jesus and his disciples. As Christians, when reading Bible passages such as in today's gospel, we must choose how we interpret the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. First, it is important to remember that because the gospel writer speaks of some Pharisees in what we might interpret as a negative light, it does not reflect the behavior of all Pharisees. Second, it is a mistake to associate today's Judaism with the role of some misguided biblical Pharisees. In the first century, there were no Christians. Yet many Christians today still judge modern Jews based on their portrayal in specific biblical circumstances. This has led to the centuries-old judgment of a people faithful to our shared God and has contributed to ongoing anti-Semitism. Jews have historically never permitted observing Torah to override decisions to save a life. When evaluating a short gospel passage, it's valuable to look back at preceding events to establish context. Jesus had just returned to Capernaum after the first thrust of his mission, a series of healing miracles. The man with the unclean spirit, Simon's mother-in-law, the leper, the paralytic, and a host of others suffering from disease or who were possessed by demons. Jesus had caught the public's attention. His popularity was on the rise. People were talking about him, seeking him out, listening to him. Why then were the Pharisees in today's gospel challenging Jesus? And why was Jesus going out of his way to confront them? The Pharisees were angry. Perhaps they felt their authority was threatened. Jesus was identified as a Jew, yet he had publicly associated with tax collectors and sinners. He had not demonstrated obedience to the law in regard to fasting, hand washing, the observance of the Sabbath. And oh my, the things that he did on this particular Sabbath, harvesting a crop and healing the sick. These particular Pharisees chose to add these Sabbath outrages to a growing list of offenses to be used to encourage allies to join with them in destroying Jesus. Their obsession with religious authority, traditional observances, and righteousness were the tools used by the author of this gospel to sharpen the reader's focus on the compassion brought by Jesus. At stake here was the observance of the Sabbath, a traditional day of rest, deeply significant to the Jewish identity, one of the 10 Commandments. The day of rest was never intended to be ruled so strictly by humans that God was sidelined. This is not just a first century problem. Don't we all know of Christian sects that are governed by the strict observance of humanly constructed rules? Jesus did not deny the Sabbath. Jesus chose to instigate this confrontation with the Pharisees by defying the rule of Sabbath rest in order to work. The Pharisees had a particular rule definition of work in conjunction with their relationship with God. The Pharisees' God was a judgmental one, a God whom they worshipped by the book, a God who delivered consequences if the rules were contravened. They placed their ritualistic definition of work before human needs. Jesus, the Son of God, was incarnated man to invite all people into a new, personal, and loving relationship with God. Jesus, the Son of Man, claimed the Sabbath as a day of placing humanity securely and in relationship with this loving God over the importance of ritual and law. Jesus deliberately provoked the confrontation. The disciples could have waited to pluck heads of grain until after this day of Sabbath. They were, after all, plucking heads of grain, not harvesting enough grain to make a meal. Jesus could have waited to heal the man with the withered hand until the day following Sabbath as well. The man's affliction was long-standing and not life-threatening. Indeed, both of these events could have taken place without any Pharisee present to witness them. While the conflict about the Sabbath and Sabbath law is the core of this gospel, the issue goes somewhat deeper. Jesus was proclaiming in both word and deed a new way of life and a new way of understanding God. He said the Sabbath was made for humankind and not humankind for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. There is no question that we are all God's chosen creation, well beloved and cherished. What kind of God do we choose? Do we choose a benign God governed by Sunday church ritual? Or do we choose an active, in-your-face God who is present in our everyday lives? Do we choose to remain placid in the knowledge of God's love? Or do we actively engage in God's love? How do we act upon God's love in our interactions with those around us, friends and strangers, the lovable and the unlovable, those with whom we closely identify and those who baffle us? When God gets too close to us, how do we choose? Amen.